so the question is, why should any piece of matter, no matter how construed, how does it exude feelings? Is it like the Aladdin's lamp that sort of you rub it together and then suddenly feelings, like these thought bubbles emerge out of it? How is this possible? Why should there be this correlation between the physics of this organ on the one hand and consciousness on the other? That is a truly hard problem. And so now we're confronted with these LLMs. They're very good. They're getting better by the day. Yeah, they still make mistakes, but they're very impressive. And of course, if you talk to some of them that don't have those guardrails on, right, the training wheels on, you ask them, are they conscious? They'll tell you they're conscious. But it's all a deep fake. It doesn't feel like anything. It's all meaningless, random bit utterances. It taught me several things. It taught me the primacy of consciousness, because at that point there was no world, there was nothing. So there's nothing there except this experience. And also there was no self. There was no self in any way, shape, or form. And then it also gave me it left behind this gift, this wonderful gift of taking away any fear of death.
Hello everyone, I'm Larry Weeks. Welcome to the Bounce Podcast. Hope you're doing well. What has no form is present wherever you go, whenever a sensation, feeling, or thought occurs. And without it, there's no experience of anything. No, this is not a part of a Zen koan or some insight practice, although it certainly could be. The answer is consciousness, which is the topic of what I think you'll find to be a very interesting episode. My guest is Christof Koch. Christof is a computational neuroscientist and neuropsychologist, best known for his work on the neural basis of consciousness. He collaborated with Francis Crick, who co-discovered the structure of DNA, on establishing a neurobiological framework for consciousness. Christof was the president and chief scientist of the Allen Institute for Brain Science in Seattle. He is also the chief scientist of the Tiny Blue Dot Foundation in Santa Monica, California. It funds research meant to alleviate suffering, anxiety, and other forms of distress in all people. Christof has written over 5 books on consciousness, and his latest, Then I Am Myself the World, What Consciousness Is and How to Expand It, covers the subject of consciousness via physics, psychology, neuroscience, philosophy, and computer science, along with his experiences exploring his own consciousness. And it is a fantastic book. I highly recommend it. Consciousness is the experience we have of the world and ourselves, and it is famously known as the hard problem in scientific and philosophical circles, which was coined by David Chalmers. The term hard problem addresses the question of how subjective experience can emerge from physical matter. And many think the hard problem is insoluble. You can't correlate something measurable with something that isn't. Christof, among others, believes that the integrated information theory of consciousness offers the best explanation so far for solving the hard problem, which is what we discuss in part in this episode. Now, why am I doing a podcast on this? I mean, outside of being nerdy or something. Understanding consciousness is not only important as it applies to things like artificial intelligence, ethics, and medicine. Like, what's the difference between consciousness in, say, a fully developed human brain and that of a fetus? Consider it is the bedrock of all human experience. Consciousness is everything. It is the basis for all of our happiness and all of our suffering. And exploring consciousness can lead to practices and activities like mindfulness, meditation, anything that gives you a flow state, any absorbing activity that allows you to lose yourself, and it frees us from our critical egos. And this can contribute to well-being. These are all aspects of this gift we have called consciousness. So yes, this is a deep topic, but I think you'll find this a very accessible conversation. So on this episode, I talk with Christof about defining consciousness. We talk about the various theories on its origin and the hard problem. We discuss integrated information theory. How far down the tree of life does consciousness go? Does it go as far as a snail? How about a plant? We discuss the mind-body problem, the physical structures and subjective experiences. We discuss qualities of experience and the perception box, distinctions between consciousness and intelligence, We talk about mind melding, which is kind of fun, and the possibilities of an uber consciousness. Why AI or any compute-based system may never be truly sentient. The boundaries of consciousness and the dissolution of self as we get into Christof's experiences with psychedelics. We discuss the power of belief, and we discuss the debate about free will and what he calls the intrinsic causal power of consciousness. Not all the answers are provided here because each answer leads to more questions, right? And it creates an infinite regress. That said, what is given here hopefully leads to a sense of awe and wonder for you. Because the lights are on. We are conscious. We are aware. Why are these lights on? How and why am I aware that I'm aware? This kind of exploration lifts me above the gravitational pull of the self, for a little while anyway. I hope it does for you too. So enjoy. I give you Christof Koch. First of all, thank you for agreeing to come on. Love the book. But my audience, it's a mix. I'm not 100% sure, but the majority of my audience, if I were to look at the professions, at least on my subscriber list, psychologists, teachers, educators, there are quite a few people in the tech world. They are people, if they're listening to my podcast, who are interested in bettering their lives, improving their lives, and exploring these kind of topics. Christof, what I hope that we can do, or what I hope to gain, at least for myself and for the audience from our conversation, is how can we discuss these concepts, or can we discuss these concepts and give people a sense of the awe and wonder about our lives so that they can look at life and their experience of it differently without a wholesale altering of their circumstances, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. In fact, I think, yes, it's quite possible.
Yeah, I think you quoted Proust, somebody did, and it's been in the back of my head. You know, the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. So I hope to do that in our discussion.
That's entirely correct. It's all in your head, because the construction of reality is in your head. The narrative is in your head, and you can reframe it. You alone can reframe it.
You jumped right into it. I had that on the question list. And Christof, let me just say, by the way, does this all fit into your interest as well? Okay, great. Yep. Super. I've read your book. By the way, the book is really good. And
I wanted
to say, yes, thank you for writing it. It's a great book. I haven't seen my review pop up yet, but somebody beat me to it, I think. But that's under Amazon.
Thank you. Thank you for posting.
It wasn't just the content of the book, which was, that is the book, right? But it's the prose and how you wrote this. And so my compliments. It up-leveled my reading. My reading experience was wonderful. Exploring. Obviously, I have an interest in the topic, but usually, Christof, the topic of consciousness is either so scientific as to be impenetrable, or so philosophical as to be abstract. You know, there's nothing to grasp. But this book, just played it perfectly. And it kept this sense of mystery for me, but yet explained everything that I had questions about. So
it shouldn't be so difficult, because consciousness is the only thing we know. It's the only thing we have, as philosophers say, direct acquaintance with. I don't know about atoms and black holes and viruses and all of that. The only thing I know is what I see, what I hear, what I feel, what I can sense. What I hate, what I love, those are the only things I directly know about the universe and about myself. So it should be relatively easy to describe those states.
It is well, then let's do it. So
let's do it, indeed.
Christof, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Larry, for having me.
Let's define it. So I'll probably keep some of the prelude in here, Christof, for our audience, so they know where we jumped off here. So I may ask some questions that have some built-in assumptions that may be wrong. And if they do, feel free to correct me. And one of the reasons, Christof, I wanted you on is this is the most important topic in the world, because there's nothing else but our experience of it, right? That's what this is.
That's correct. And that's also sort of the definition of consciousness is experience, any experience. It could be banal, like the, cold pizza left over from yesterday's party. It could be a toothache. It could be feeling of love for your partner. It could be dread, fear, disgust, pain, pleasure, orgasm, whatever. You can take, mushrooms. All of those are just experiences. And in fact, the only thing we know about the world. Everything else we have to infer, the existence of people and stars and dogs and trees, all of that we infer. And it's a very reasonable inference, but we don't directly know. The only thing I know are these moving things and these sound sources, and and you can experience that even better. You said you're also doing meditation, right? When you sit there and close your eyes, and you really train yourself to be really aware of minute changes in your breath, or to feel the air moving into the hairs in your nostrils in and out, and it's all just that's ultimately the only thing we know. And so the challenge has always been, how do these ephemeral stuff, how does it relate to what we think really exists, which is atoms and stars and all the elements that make up our periodic tables and other things. What's the relationship between those two? That's the ancient mind-body problem.
Okay, so yeah, because I think Joseph Campbell said in his book, The Power of Myth, that he said something like, people say they're looking for meaning in life, and he thinks what people are looking for is the sense of aliveness. And to me, that's what this is. That's what consciousness is. So we're already kind of defining it here, but is it pretty much the Nagel definition of what it is to be something or to feel like something?
Yes. In fact, my previous book was entitled The Feeling of Life Itself. It's feeling alive. When you're dead, or when you're in deep sleep, or when you're doing heart surgery, doing anesthesia, you don't feel like anything, right? Tonight, we're all going to go back to bed and we'll close our eyes. And then particularly early on at night, we'll disappear. We will not exist for ourselves anymore. Our body will, of course, still be there. So other people, your partner can see your body, but you don't exist for yourself until you wake up inside your sleeping brain and have, dreaming experiences. That's a different state of consciousness.
So I'm glad you mentioned the dreaming, because I was a little confused when I was reading your book, because you do mention something like that. I think there's a sentence or two.
Dreaming is very much a state of consciousness, right? You love, you.
But you are conscious, so you're existing.
You're highly conscious. Yes.
But if you're dreaming, aren't you existing to yourself because you're aware of that?
You are.
Okay,
yes,
got it. Okay.
Yes. Now, you don't, it's interesting. So dreaming consciousness is not quite the same as wake consciousness. So for instance, you don't have this knowledge of self, right? You're not surprised that you meet a long dead lover or family member, right? You're not surprised that you can walk through walls or that you can fly. So the sense of self is definitely muted during dreams. But you're highly conscious. You can have wonderful conscious experiences. In fact, you can wake up and cry because you just had this incredible, intense emotional experience. So it's just a different state of consciousness where you're dissociated from the world. You don't directly experience the external world, right? You don't, although you can sometimes, if the alarm rings, you can that can intrude and you put it into your dream. But by and large, you're dissociated from the world. Just like doing ketamine. It's another state when you take ketamine, when you take it, you're dissociated from the world, yet you're highly conscious.
So can I use sentience interchangeably with consciousness?
Yes, I do. Sentience, awareness, consciousness, existence, subjective state, phenomenology, the mental, those are all different words that people have invented. They all describe the same feeling. It feels like something, a la Thomas Nagel.
Okay. So now let's talk about where it comes from and what Chalmers calls the hard problem. Why and how do we have this subjective experience? Would you say, we're going to get into, part of this answer, I'm assuming will be integrated information theory, but I was reading your book, so it seems like you think that consciousness is physical, but you have to enlarge your understanding of the physical. Do I have that wrong? And please, you can delve into IIT.
Well, so first of all, we think if it has a physical substrate in the body. Throughout most of history, in most of cultures, people thought it was a heart. So you say, honey, I love you with all my heart, right? You give your Valentine, you give a heart-shaped chocolate, not a hypothalamus or brain-shaped chocolate, right? You see someone wears a heart.
That would be, I need to spin that out on Amazon. That would be great.
Yeah, you see, holy heart academies, right? I haven't seen a single holy brain academy, right? Doesn't exist. So throughout most of culture, we thought consciousness arises from the heart. Now today, we believe it's the brain because, small damage to bits and pieces of the brain can profoundly change your consciousness. In fact, during neurosurgery, the neurosurgeon can go inside the brain and stimulate particular parts of the brain. Let's see here in the back, and you get flashes of light. Or, here in the medial temporal lobe, and you might recall memory. So there's really a very close association between the brain and consciousness. So we think the substrate of consciousness is the brain. But now the big question is, well, how can something physical, if you think about it, it's totally implausible. How can something physical, so the brain is a physical thing, like this, like a book, like anything, like my iPhone. Yet my feelings are, they're ephemeral, they're feelings. And, they're subjective and they're private, right? So the brain you can look at, if you put me in a scanner, I can show you images of my brain. You can point at it, you can measure it. You can use all the tools of science to measure my brain. But my feelings, you can't measure, right? They're subject to me. They're private. This what makes them so difficult. They're not accessible to you. I don't know whether your true feelings about me, right? You may pretend you really like me, but you actually think I'm a bozo, right? And I can't tell unless you tell me. So it makes, and to your point, you can live with somebody for many years, and then suddenly you discover they have an affair that they totally kept hidden from you. And that tells you it's very difficult to directly know what the other is experiencing. That is a property of consciousness. It's called the first person aspect. Right? It feels like something. It is private. It's subject to. It's only private to you and not accessible to me. That makes it more difficult to study than electrons and black holes. And so the question is, why should any piece of matter, no matter how construed, how does it exude feelings? Is it like the Aladdin's lamp that sort of you rub it together and then suddenly feelings, like these thought bubbles emerge out of it? How is this possible? So again, this has always been the challenge. And Dave Chalmers, the philosopher that you mentioned, he said, yes, we know there are this correlation. Certain parts of the brain are involved in certain types of conscious experience, like vision is in the back and emotions are there and hearing is over there. He said that's totally true. But why should there be this correlation between the physics of this organ on the one hand and consciousness on the other? That is a truly hard problem.
But you feel or you think that IIT
Okay, so let's step back.
Yes.
Okay, so people are trying now. So
it's this feeling. The whole problem is this ephemeral.
How does a feeling come into the world? How does
subjectivity
feeling? How does any subjective state, no matter how benign, no matter what it is, how?
And we understand the physical properties of thought, where that comes from, the brain, how the brain works, processing. But feeling is
but we don't. When I close my eyes and I have a thought, let's say I think about the Statue of Liberty, right? You can easily imagine that. Well, I understand how can this image arise in my mind? Because I'm pretty sure the computer, when you enter, when I go on Google search and it gives me, a gazillion images of the Statue of Liberty, it doesn't feel like anything. It puts up these, to a computer, the Statue of Liberty is as meaningful as this cover upside down, or it's a totally random picture. It's just a collection of bits. But to you and I, it's meaningful. It conveys America, and it was brought over, it was paid for by the French, etc., etc. We have this entire story associated with it. So you have to ask, how does this arise? Now, people have there many sort of philosophical ideas about the relationship between the physical and the mental. So one of the two most prominent scientific theories of consciousness, this is not a philosophical school like physicalism or idealism or dualism or psychism, is this integrated information theory of consciousness that's due to this Italian-American psychiatrist, neuroscientist Giulio Tononi. And it avoids the hard problem. It starts out with consciousness, which is very different from what everyone else does, including what I did myself 30 years ago with my work with Francis Crick, the Nobel laureate who discovered, the helical structure of DNA. We said, well, maybe this particular electrical signal that buzzes, that hums at 40 times a second, called 40 hertz electrical oscillations, maybe that's a hallmark of consciousness. All right, so when you put an electrode into the brain, sometimes you can see these periodic oscillations, waves, electrical waves that go up and down 40 times a second. They're called gamma oscillation of 40 hertz, and we thought this is a hallmark of consciousness, which looks like it was along the right track. But that's not consciousness. That may be a footprint. And so what we try to do, what most people try to do, they take the brain and then squeeze really hard and say, oh, what comes out must be consciousness. It's 40 hertz, or it's the front of the brain, or the back of the brain, or it's a global broadcast, or it's a particular function of the brain. But then you're always confronted with a hard problem. So integrated information theory does this differently. It says, first of all, let's acknowledge that the only thing that truly exists is existence for itself, and only consciousness exists for itself. My conscious experience right now exists for me, and it's absolute. This is what existence is. It exists for me. It doesn't exist for you. It doesn't exist for other people. It doesn't depend on anything on other people. It only exists for me, and this is absolute existence. Everything else is relative existence. Like my brain exists relative. It doesn't have this app because it doesn't exist for itself. My kidney doesn't exist for itself. It exists for others, including me. I can look at my kidney. I can get a scan, a whole body scan. I can see my kidney. But my kidney, because it doesn't exist for itself. Only consciousness exists for itself. Not always. At night, as we discussed, it will disappear for times, during deep sleep. And you can anesthetize it and bring it back. Okay, so that's one of the key properties of consciousness. It exists intrinsically for itself. And then it says, well, there are 4 other properties of any conscious experience, no matter how construed. It could be a near-death experience, a psychedelic experience, you being in love. All of these different feelings, they have certain things in common. They exist for themselves. They're definite. It feels like something to be in love. When you walk inside your house and it's dark, you feel something is off. You have a vague feeling something is off. Again, that is a very specific feeling. Okay, it's definite, it's holistic, it's one thing integrated. It's not 2 or 3 separate experiences. It's one experience that's integrated. It's highly informative and different from anything else you've ever experienced. And it has certain boundaries. There are certain things that are in this experience. And there's a universe of possible things that could be experienced, but that are not experienced right now. So there are these 5 properties. And so this is true of any experience. Any experience exists for itself, is specific, is structured, is unitary, and is definite. And so now the theory says, well, let's look around at the world and see what possible could be the substrate for those 5 properties. And the way it looks at things is very pragmatic, operational. It says the only thing I have to assume about the world is that I can manipulate it. So I have a brain or computer chip or, earth, a piece of soil, and I can manipulate it. I can turn those neurons on and those neurons off, and I can observe what happens. Or I can turn these transistors off, and I can see what's the downstream effect of turning these transistors on or off. So I can operate. I have an operational access to the world. That's the only thing I have to assume. And now I say so I assume this operational, I take a brain or any other mechanisms like a brain, and it says, well, I want this brain. If this brain has these causal properties corresponding to intrinsic existence, and it's specific, it's definite, it's structured, and it's unitary, then that is a substrate for a type of consciousness, for a conscious experience. So whenever a system exists for itself and is specific, is structured, is differentiated, and is unitary, as defined by the theory, it exists for itself and is conscious. How much is conscious is given by this number, integrated information, the integrated information of the system. It's a pure number between 0, when strictly speaking, it doesn't exist for itself. It's fully reducible to a simpler system or to a subsystem. Or this number could be very big, which means it's highly irreducible and it's highly conscious. So that's the quantity of consciousness. And it also describes the qualitative aspect of consciousness by unfolding all the possible causal relationship of this particular system that consists of these 1,000 neurons, these neurons on and those neurons off, or those neurons are on and these neurons off. All these various combinations, they have causal power upon each other as defined through my operational measure. And this unfolded, this is what conscious experience is. It's the unfolded causal power of the system upon itself, its ability to change, to affect its future state. This is what consciousness is. So it's very specific, the theory. It makes some very specific claims. Some are very counterintuitive that in principle could be measured. But it says finally what consciousness is, it's a maximum intrinsic causal power of this particular system upon itself, like my brain, like maybe the brains of my dog, like the brains here of the rodents that are here in our basements, like the brains maybe of a little fly that flies around. And you can describe these different consciousness by how big they are. And the fly presumably has a tiny integrated information. A dog will have a bigger one, and you and I will have even bigger one. And it also tells us why you and I are not one uber consciousness. You are conscious, right, Larry? I'm conscious, but there is nothing.
You can't stack them. You can't stack them and get it.
Exactly. There's no uber. There's no uber, Larry, Christof. There's no amalgamation of Christof, at least not with current technology. If I imagine some brain connectivity, like Neuralink, in principle, I can start connecting my brain with your brain. But then the theory says very clearly, at some point, the integrated information between our brains.
Would that create a new, if we integrated?
Yes. Yes, but at the loss, you would disappear and I would disappear.
Got it.
Because it says that at any point, there's only one maximum of cause-effect power, and there aren't sub-substrates within me. So there isn't several consciousness. In my brain, there's only one, unless, of course, I cut my brain like this way, as happens during a certain type of medical operation when I want to prevent electrical, seizures from spreading to my left, to my right brain. I cut the 200 million fibers that connect my two brains, my two brain hemispheres. Then I have two isolated hemispheres, and as far as we can tell, there are two conscious minds. Only one can speak, typically the left hemisphere, but the right is also conscious. It just can't talk. It can sing, actually. So same thing, if we start connecting our two brains, at some point, when there's a lot of brain connectivity, there will be one new Ubermind, some sort of amalgamation of Larry and Christof, but you will disappear and I will disappear. There will just be the single Ubermind.
So, wow, there's a lot there. Let me try to unpack some things by asking some questions about it. So, based on the theory, would you say that consciousness is not a derivative necessarily of evolution, but rather it sits at the foundation of reality?
Yes, because it says, because ultimately it's a property of any physical system. So it may be possible that even non-evolved systems, like very simple physical systems, like we might find them, certain types of crystal or certain types of structures that arise in the solar corona, at least briefly may feel like something, but then dissipate. Now, of course, evolution has assembled these very complicated systems we call organisms that have very high causal power. They're very, very complex. But what gets selected for by evolution is behavior. If I survive to promulgate my DNA, and I can protect my children so they will promulgate their DNA, that'll this phenotype will survive. So evolution doesn't directly act on consciousness. It doesn't maximize consciousness. It maximizes adaptability in behavior. But it seems to be it has led indirectly to creatures that have high level of consciousness. It also led to creatures that can do mathematics and can appreciate art, right? And evolution didn't select for art or for mathematics, but it's a byproduct of evolution.
So then it's a matter of organization. You're arranging atoms in a certain way that appears to bring consciousness into being.
It's a structural thing. Yes, that's entirely correct. You have to look at, so there's no Turing test, also what it means. There's no Turing test for consciousness. You have to look under the hood. You have to look at the processor where actually the metal hits the road, as it were, and look at the transistors or look at the neurons and how they interact with each other. And do they have high causal power? That's how you know that this is a substrate for a highly conscious system. Yes.
So then the more integrated the information a system possesses, the more it is conscious, or the more conscious it is. So
that's correct.
So how far down does this? So now let's go downstream, or let's reduce this to.
We don't know
parts of this. Okay, because there's parts of this that sounds like panpsychism. The fundamental aspect of the universe, but it's different from panpsychism. Correct.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. So for instance, most people would accept the proposition that 100 years ago was very thought to be unlikely, that certainly most mammals are conscious. Right? And anyone who lives with other animals like cats and dogs or horses has no doubt about that. But I have to infer it. I first of all, I have to start inferring consciousness in you, right? Because I don't have direct experience of you. But since you're so similar to me and you behave in the same way I do, you have a similar evolutionary developmental history.
And you're conscious, so yeah. There's
same thing with dogs and cats. They're very similar to us. They would co-evolve with us. Now, as the creatures get more and more distant, like a squid, right? A squid has, 8 or 9 brains, right? And does it have 9 different consciousness, 8 in its arm and 1 in its central cephalopod, or is it 1? A bee is, has 1 million neurons, roughly. They're 10 times denser, the circuit density of the bee brain, because it has to fly, right? So it has to be incredibly compact, 10 times denser than your or my brain. And it can do very complicated behaviors. It can recognize individuals. It can do the waggle dance. It has these very elaborate social organization. So I would say, yeah, probably by IIT, it is conscious. It has this highly, highly recurrent nonlinear neural networks that make up those 1 million neurons. Now, what about a protozoa? You look at a single cell, it has roughly, 10,000 different species of proteins, probably 1 billion of them altogether. It's amazingly complex. No one has ever modeled any of this. No one has ever managed to capture the complexity of all the molecular interaction. So according to IT, it may well feel an itsy bit like a protozoa. Now, it doesn't know anything about the weekend. It doesn't have a voice in its head. But according to the theory, it may feel like something. And then once you dissolve the membrane, for example, by applying an antibiotics and it dies, then it wouldn't feel like anything anymore. Now, the question is, how low does it go? What about elementary particles? And in principle, it's possible that they may have a tiny phi integrated information that's just barely above 0. So in that sense, yes, it would feel an itsy bitsy bit to be an elementary particle. At this point, we simply don't know. And then people say, wait, isn't that like panpsychism? It shares some of the intuition of panpsychism.
And panpsychism, for the audience, is that even chairs and rocks could have some consciousness.
Yeah, because fundamentally it says everything has both physical and mental properties. So It's like an inside and an outside. There's an outside to elementary particles. They have charge and mass, and they interact with other particles in ways physics describe. But they also have an inside. It feels like something to be an electron. And then if you put a lot of them together in a chair, you get a lot of little feelings that build up to bigger feelings. IT says no. If there is any non-zero integrated information, it doesn't automatically become larger. As sand, let's take the extreme case of a sand heap, a gigantic dune, right? At the beach, you have a dune, collection of trillion of sand particles. It doesn't feel like anything to be a dune, because if you look at the integrated information within there, the causal power, it's minute, because the individual grains of sand don't interact really much with each other. And integrated information requires that this neuron is coupled to that neuron and to this neuron and can influence the future of this neuron or be influenced by that neuron over there. And this doesn't happen in a chair or in a dune. So unlike panpsychism, it says no. The individual grains may have an itsy bit like consciousness, but if you pile them all together, you don't get more. It's just like you pile 1 million people into a stadium. You don't get, you get 1 million individual conscious mind, but you don't get an Uber stadium. You don't get the mind of a stadium. So this has always been the challenge on panpsychism. How do you stop this aggregation? Why does the aggregation stop at you and I, but doesn't go up? And IT says in each case, you have to look at the maximum of causal effect power. And in a stadium, you got 10,000 individuals, but yes, you can have these common observations like the wave, right? That you get sometimes in a stadium, but the information exchange among members of a stadium is tiny compared to the massive information integration within your brain. It's completely dwarfed by that. So the maximum will always be resolutely inside the brain rather than across brain, which is why we don't experience an Uber mind. We only experience my mind, and you will experience your mind.
So this leads me then to, based on what we're saying, this is great, by the way, Christof, thank you. This is why AI will never be sentient, in the sense that you're not a pure materialist that just given enough, digital connections, neural connections or nodes, and or plugging in enough information, it will never have phi.
It depends. It depends. So for computers, so obviously they have a radical different, quote, evolutionary history and a developmental history, right? Because they're engineered and not evolved. But in principle, the theory is totally, it's agnostic with respect to the underlying physical substrate. So you have to look at where the rubber hits the road, which is the CPU or the TPU or the ALU, whatever. The stuff where the transistors are wired.
Oh,
and then
if
you look
there's
at
a new
that,
material that could change it. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So it really depends on the computational substrate. So brains have the substrate where one neuron gets input from 50,000 other neurons, roughly, or 100,000, and is connected directly to 50,000 or 100,000 other neurons with a massive degree of overlap. So they're by far the most complex systems we've ever encountered in the known universe. Transistors, particularly the CPU, is very different. You have one transistor that typically gets input from 3 or 4 other transistors and communicates its output through the channel gate to 3 or 4 other transistors. So if you formally apply the theory, integrated information theory, to such construct, you see the integrated information, because they're not very integrated, is very, very low. They can simulate everything. There's no question that a computer, properly programmed, can simulate the human brain, and some people are trying to do that. And of course, these simulations in the fullness of time will work, and it will simulate my brain. And of course, if you connect the simulation to a voice synthesizer, it'll speak and it'll tell you, I'm conscious, just like Claude right now, the chatbot, can tell you it's conscious. But it's deep fake. It's just behavior. It's going through the motion. It's like simulating a rainstorm, but it doesn't get wet inside the computer. You can simulate nuclear explosion. In fact, that's what people at Lawrence Livermore are doing. Since the limited test ban treaty, they can only simulate. We're not allowed to detonate nuclear devices anymore, so we simulate them. But you don't have to be afraid that your simulation is going to blow up the computer center and spew radiation, right?
You have a great analogy of the black hole. You can simulate a black hole on your computer, but you're not going to, all of a sudden, the room and all the material information is not going to be sucked into your computer and disappear.
Exactly. Now, maybe, so this is what I mean. You commented early on, consciousness is something real. In fact, the most real thing there is. It has causal power. My brain, in its current state, can determine the next state my brain is in. This is what makes it a highly complex engine. A computer can also do that, but it has puny integrated information, at least as the way we currently build von Neumann machine. It may be different on quantum computers, or it may be different on so-called neuromorphic computers that are built much closer in the image of a brain. But the challenge is, Larry, we grew up and we evolved in an environment where people talk, obviously, and we accept implicitly, well, if they can speak and they can tell us about the state. That's why I ask you. That's why you asked me at the beginning of the conversation, how are you today? You're asking me about my current conscious state. Am I happy? Am I sad? Am I, sick, whatever? Do I have an overhang? Those are all different questions about how do I feel, my conscious state. And you automatically assume if you answer, well, of course you're conscious, because that's how we interact with each other. And so now we're confronted with these LLMs. They're very good. They're getting better by the day. Yeah, they still make mistakes, but they're very impressive. And of course, if you talk to some of them that don't have those guardrails on, right, the training wheels on, you ask them, are they conscious? They'll tell you they're conscious. But it's all a deep fake. It doesn't feel like anything. It's all meaningless, random bit utterances. And what they learned, they were trained on this, they're just like these gigantic vampires. They suck out all the human creativity, they sucked up everything, all the books, all the text that are out on the internet, and then they regurgitate them in very clever ways. So in the limit, they will be able to do everything we can do, and probably better, faster, cheaper, but they will never be what we are, which is conscious.
So, and to me, I think the intuitions that are out there in the culture is that given enough intelligence of a system, it will reach sentience based on that scale of intelligence. And with the theory that you're saying that it's not a matter of intelligence or
Correct.
Information, it's how it's organized and the substrate on which it's organized, right?
Yes, you got it exactly right.
Okay.
Intelligence is ultimately about doing. It's about acting in the world, right? On a short, medium, or long term.
And you're talking about
scale, right?
subjectivity,
feelings,
experience.
which is different,
yeah.
which is being, which is state of
right.
being. And so, yes, you can be. There's no question to me. They will be super intelligent sooner or later, no question.
And they will seem like it. They will.
Yes, because they talk.
To some engineers. The guy at Google, he already
Lemoyne. Yes.
Yeah, presumed that it was just the way it interacted. But
because
I like how it's deep fakes, like you said. It's got it.
The challenge with that is, Larry, that as we encounter these, so we now facing the challenge.
Well, that's why you need to make a test. You need to get to 5. You need to test. You need to create some kind of measurement so that we can.
Well, we do have that for the clinic, so that's one of the practical spin-offs.
Well, as you develop this, so that once the robot says I'm conscious, you can apply some level.
But people still won't be. Let's say a kid grows up with it, like in the science fiction movies, right? They'll say,
or her falls in love with it, like her.
Yeah, of course she's conscious. I know intuitively. I talk to her, she gets my joke, right? Already now you can see these people who fall in love with their chatbots. They say, yeah, it understands me. And then you tell me, according to some abstract theory that I don't understand, you tell me it's not conscious. That's all BS. I know she's conscious. And so I think it's a big danger because it'll lead to a growing devaluation of human experience. Because, there are all these creatures, they can do what we can do, but better and cheaper and faster and more reliable. Let's get rid of humans. Why do I need humans?
Well, just the fact that you're cheapening human experience is.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not even going down the extermination
I think that's okay. That's inevitable. Why do I need friends? I can get all my chatbots. I interact with them. They're much nicer.
Well, that's an interesting question, Christof. So, does it cheapen experience if I'm still having a great experience? It makes me think of virtual reality, putting a headset on and going somewhere else. I'm still having this experience.
You have, but it becomes more and more solipsistic, right? Yes, you're correct. You can still have experiences, but it's more and more solipsistic. You're surrounded by dry artifacts that are all fake. You're surrounded by a deep fake world. Yeah, you can fool yourself into an artificial paradise. Yes, you can do that, and people will do that. Many people will do that. They will prefer the artificial paradise over the real world. I grant you that. I'm concerned.
Is there?
I mean, it's a little bit too late now.
I was about to say the cat's out of the box.
Stopped 500 years ago.
Yeah. So, getting back to experience, just what we're talking about. I just had some questions because I was reading your book, and where you mention you mentioned qualities of experience. I thought it was fascinating that you said that it's the quality. One of the qualities of experience is it's kind of a frame by frame aspect where every moment is unique. Right? Do I have that right?
Yes.
It's like a frame in a film.
Again. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And to me, does that explain some of my experiences where, I had an accident. Me and my wife were on a scooter and I flipped the scooter and time slowed. It seemed to slow down. Like all of a sudden, and maybe this is just a cognitive process, but it made me wonder when I read that passage in your book.
So Oliver Sacks has talked about this. Have you heard about the neurologist, Oliver Sacks?
Yes.
Okay, so he has, I think it's called the leg to stand on, where he runs down in Scotland, he gets chased by a big bull and has an accident. And then he also has migraines, and sometimes under visual migraines, this can also happen where time slows down and you see things one frame after the other. The Matrix movie, they had this, what they call bullet time, remember? In the first
Yeah.
Matrix movie, when the bullet is incredible.
Yes.
What all that shows us that under certain conditions, very often pathological condition like your accident or my visual migraines or Oliver Sacks' accident, time can perceived time can slow down. It's a real phenomena. The extreme case so I talk in my book, I open my book, then I myself, the world with my near-death experience. Okay, so that's an extreme case because my experience, there was no more passage of time. This experience wasn't too long, it wasn't too short, it simply was. And I think what that tells you, that perception of time is itself an experience. And this is what Immanuel Kant and other philosophers pointed out more than 200 years ago. Space and time are constructs of our mind. They're not out there. They're actively constructed by our minds in order to make sense of things, in order for us to evolve and to make sense of this very complex, evolving world. And then depending on circumstances, on drugs you take or accidents or other, when you're bored, for instance, time may become very slow. And in hindsight, during COVID, people can't really remember what happened because one day was like the next one. So time is very much a subjective has subjective qualities constructed by our mind.
Yeah, it pushes me into my meditation practice, or to be present in moments and to realize that I can do that. I just thought it was beautiful because there's this concept, Japanese term ichigo ichi, which is one moment, one time, that each moment is unique. And you just spelled it out in the book that's how consciousness is. It's picture by picture. It'll never be the same, even though it may be similar. We will never be the same moment to moment, but even though it's similar. But I don't know, it helps me. So
learn to appreciate it.
Yes, absolutely. And Oliver Berkman has this phrase, "Don't be an experience hoarder." He talks about the problem with not wanting a moment to pass is that it's going to pass, and you're going to miss the moment by not wanting it to pass. So I just thought it was very interesting. So
when I see people who have an experience and they spend the entire time on their phone taking picture of the experience rather than having the experience. Right?
Yes.
They're merely concerned with capturing the experience and so they miss the experience.
Yes. So you talk about, by the way, you have in your book, you mentioned my pain is not the same as my brain. What do you mean by that? I was just curious and I wrote it down. My pain is not the same as my brain. Is that there's the feeling, the experience is different than the actual
substrate,
cognition.
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
That's what right now I have a picture in my head. I see you. It's dark inside my skull. I've been there doing neurosurgery. There are no lights inside there's no room. There's no viewing room inside my brain. It's all dark, yet I see a world with lights and emotion. So it's just to say my experience is very, very different. It depends on a physical substrate, my brain. If I lose my brain due to stroke or gunshot or virus, I don't have an experience. But it's very different because there used to be very popular this identity theory where philosophers said, well, it's all the same, whether the substrate is identical with the experience. To me, that's just completely nonsense.
So you just mentioned a couple times, you had a near-death experience, and then was that a psychedelic experience or separate? Were you sick And you
No, so I didn't have a medical or physical. So I didn't have an accident or near drowning on the battlefield or something. I took a very powerful, a very mighty molecule called 5-MeO-DMT, and it was a so-called heroic dose, which I didn't know at the time. And within
wait a second, a heroic dose? Is it?
Yeah, that's what I learned afterwards from the guide. She gave it to me. She said, typically it's best immediately to plunge off on the deep end of the pool, because it's utterly remarkable. Within, you inhale it, you burn it and inhale it, and you take 3 breaths. And at the end of the 3rd, beginning of the 4th, you see already, so it's like 10 or 15 seconds, the visual field begins to fracture. So it turns into hexagonal. It's very distinct. It becomes black. So there's smoke that comes from their burning. The smoke turns black. The visual field shatters. And it looks like a tunnel opens up. And then at this last thought, holy shit, what I've got myself into. And, this is it. I'm going to die. And then subjectively, it feels like this. You're suddenly in this space when, for me, there was nothing except this bright light of overwhelming intensity. Some people call it a tunnel. For me, it was really a bright light. It wasn't a bright light on a canvas. It was just, I think in my case, what happened, space convulsed itself into this singularity and was just this of overwhelming icy blue light. Nothing else. There was no color. There was no sound, no motion, no depth. There was no pain, no pleasure. There was no left, right, up, down. There was no, as I said, there was no time. It wasn't too fast or too slow. It just was. That, and then this combination of terror and ecstasy. Very strange. So 3 things: bright light of overwhelming intensity, terror, and ecstasy. And that lasted for a timeless moment. No self, no body, no memory. And I wasn't, it wasn't me. There were no thoughts. There was just nothing. There was an experience, however. Right? So I mean, some people call it the non-dual experience.
But, by the way, what was the substance? What was it?
5-MeO-DMT.
Okay. So
the toad.
So you had two psychedelic experiences. Is that right? So that one, and was there another one?
Yeah, mystical. So I must say, I've only come to this very late in life.
I know you I was going to ask you, was it just the curiosity of consciousness that drove you to these experiences? Because you just...
Yes, I felt finally, look, I'm consciousness.
You didn't do it as a young person. You had
No, but I grew up in a culture, do you remember Nancy Reagan?
No, I did too. No.
Your brain, the frying pan, remember?
The frying pan. This is your brain. This is your brain on drugs. Right.
Yes. So I stayed away, I indulged in alcohol, but not in anything else. And then I said, this is ridiculous. I'm a student of consciousness. And in particular, I really like the motto of the Royal Society, nullius in verba, take no one word for it. In particular, when talking about experience. Yes, I can listen to you. I can listen to other people telling me about this, but ultimately you have to experience.
It's vicarious. Yeah.
Yes. And so I tried this. This was in the first week of the pandemic. It was, I'll never do it again. It's terrifying. Just thinking about it, it's terrifying. But it was, and what it taught me several things. It taught me the primacy of consciousness, because in that point there was no world, there was nothing. There was, I sat there, my wife was there and a friend was there. I sat there apparently for 9 minutes with eyes wide open, didn't see anything. So there's nothing there except this experience. And also there was no self. And so some people really, particularly intellectual, tend to reify the self and say without the self there can't even be consciousness. It's always about referencing to me. So, I'm having an experience now. Christof is having a pain experience. Christof is having a seeing experience. I think that's wrong. And this experience had showed it to me, how wrong that is, because there was no self in any way, shape, or form. And then it also gave me it left behind this gift, this wonderful gift of taking away any fear of death, any death anxiety.
Fear. You have no fear of death.
Well, I mean, I don't want to die.
You don't want. I'm not saying you don't. Yeah, you don't.
Yeah. I don't lie. As you get older, you may have this experience. You can't sleep as well, and you think about, well, what happens if you're dead, and if you're really long dead, and you're dead forever and ever, and you look down into this existential abyss. Right? You get the vertigo. Right? You get this existential vertigo.
Angst. It's angst.
Oh yeah, pure and simple. It's angst. It's too scary to think about. I haven't had a single night like that anymore. It's now 4 years. So it's a wonderful gift, and I accept that.
But you don't want to do it again. Okay.
I don't want to. Well, it
was a wonderful, horrible. Yeah. It's giving. So I'm not, now I'm asking, because this is so subjective, right? I can't look inside and figure out what kind of experience you had. What do you postulate? So do you buy into the theory or what Aldous Huxley said about what he thought psychedelics do, that they open a window to reality where our normal consciousness is, or our brains are kind of suppressing what's around us, but drugs, by the way, I'm butchering this explanation, but drugs kind of, lift the veil, so to speak.
Yeah. Let me tell you about a different experience I had in Brazil.
Please. Yeah.
A year and a half ago, which is much closer to Aldous Huxley, which is also why this book is entitled Then I Am Myself, the World, which is taken, by the way, taken from the second act of Richard Wagner's opera Tristan and Isolde, where the two eponymous lovers, Tristan and Isolde, merge into one. They have this mystical union, and then they sing Then I Am, or in German called Selbst dann bin ich die Welt. They lose their ego, Tristan and Isolde, and they become one with the universe. So I had an experience like that, very much like described by Huxley, which really caused this ontological earthquake in my mind. So, at our age, certainly at my age, I was, last year I was 66, your metaphysics, your belief in what exists and what doesn't exist is very firmly established, right? At 66, you don't start fundamental revising your worldview anymore. But it totally shook me up because I experienced something which I didn't experience in my near-death experience. My near-death experience really didn't shake my ontology. It was scary. It took away the fear of death, but it doesn't really change the way I think about the world. But I had this extraordinary experience where I encountered mind at large. The only way I can say it. I lost the sense of self. I encountered this plethora, this plenum of nothing but stars and galaxies, complete loss of self, where the experience was, I am now one with the universe, and oh my God, it's all mental. It's all phenomenal. It's a cosmic mind. It's mind at large. It's all, I know it sounds corny.
I think it sounds, first of all, I think it sounds beautiful. And and it seems to, maybe it's not just my lack of understanding, but it seems to tie in to, or at least it doesn't conflict with IIT in the sense that, well, let me make sure I understand it. It may be possible that consciousness is this fundamental property of the universe, and our consciousness are tributaries off of it.
Yes, very much so. The metaphor, the powerful metaphor that ultimately we're in this river. The river flows from nowhere to nowhere, and there's this eddies. The eddies can be quite complex. They have their own you can look at the river and you can see these eddies, these whirlpools, they form. And after a while, they can have their own structure, their own existence. And they say, oh, gee, I'm alive. I'm unique. I have all this stuff. And then ultimately, of course, something happens and they dissolve again, right? They become reabsorbed by the river. They become part of the larger flow. They lose their identity. But in some sense, they die in the sense my identity, Christof, with my unique memories that only I have, that are different. Even if I had identical twin, they would be different from his memories. They will disappear because once my brain is gone, they'll disappear, but I'll become part of this larger mentality that is, if you want, the mind of nature or the mind of God or or however else you want to describe it. Because under this view, ultimately, it's an idealism. It's a form of idealism. So idealism is a very ancient school of thought, right, that teaches that ultimately what exists is not the physical. The physical ultimately, this stuff and rocks and stars and black holes and brains and whatnot, they are all manifestation of ultimately of something mental. There is an external world. Idealist doesn't deny there's an external world. Clearly, there's a world that there's a world of other people. You are a brain. I don't deny that. And you have your own states of mind that I don't control. But ultimately, all of that is a manifestation of something mental.
Yeah, it's
and
mind-blowing.
It may be that under these psychedelics, because typically, of course, if idealism is true, well, why can't I read your mind? Why aren't we all one mind? We're clearly not, right? So the argument is that there's this dissociative boundary that my brain, because of evolution, because evolution doesn't want evolution doesn't care about mind at large. Evolution just cares about making sure my DNA gets passed on to the next generation. That's all what evolution cares about, right? So it had to create this dissociative boundary to make sure that my consciousness is attached to this particular body with this particular DNA, and so that I can act smart and intelligently to make sure my DNA gets passed on. That's what evolution cares about.
What was the second psychedelic trip? What was the second substance? Did you
this
mention?
Was part of a ceremony. It's part of a very long 5-day, and I think it makes it different. That's why it's really the entire ceremony, because it takes 6 to 8 hours. You chant, you dance, you go into this trance. As part of that, you take this very bitter tasting brew that contains lots of compounds, the vine and the leaf. It's part of that, but it's part of a much larger 5-day experience. And you can when you listen. So there are a lot of people from the tech world there. A lot of Googleites were there. And it's just
no surprise.
Yeah, and it's just astonishing. I mean, anything that you can imagine or that is imaginable, people at some point can experience. Just extraordinary.
It's fascinating to me, Christof, because there's thinkers like you and scientists like you. Sam Harris, he describes a mushroom trip, and this guy, what is he? One of the 4 horses of atheism, whatever. But he's describing, when he describes this trip, he says something. He uses the words like something is carrying me forward. And this guy is the most parsed in language that I know. He's incredibly articulate. But to hear him describe this experience, even though it's a drug, there's
you say even though it's a drug. So I call it a medicine. B, particular ayahuasca, there's this entire very elaborate ceremony associated with it. And ultimately what it showed, many people can have these experiences without any drug under meditation. People classical can have religious conversion experience or mystical experience without any other medicine. So it just shows that sometimes we can break out from our... Yes. I think it has to do with loss of self. You have to lose your sense of self. Because the self is always there, it always watches, right? We always live within this gravitational field of planet ego. It's always about me, me, me. The ego is always there watching out for me, right? Which is good. You need it to in order to get get ahead in life and marry and raise a family and get a job and profession and PhD and all of that. But it also gets in the way because it's always about me. And then under certain condition, you can lose a sense of self. And then you can just experience the extraordinary beauty and transcendence of this place we live in. Or maybe you get fortunate enough and access sort of mind at large.
That's beautiful. Since we're on this topic, you talk about the perception box, that each of us is stuck inside our own perception box. But the good news is we can rearrange and expand the walls of this box and seek to be more open by changing that kind of underlying neural substrate. And you have this great line, Christof, that I'm gonna keep in my notes app. You say we need to have more compassion toward our fellow travelers on the river of time. That was beautiful.
Thank you. Yes.
So Would this statement be true that subjective reality, do you think subjective reality is created moment by moment? And if it is in part or whole, is it inside out versus outside in, our reality?
Our reality is a construct of our minds and our brains. And this perception box metaphor, it's really due to Elizabeth Koch, the daughter of Charles Koch in Santa Monica. So she has this beautiful picture of, so the perception box is just a box we all construct, and everyone lives in a slightly different one depending on your genes and your upbringing and your experiences. You can be open to the world, or you can be closed and fearful, constantly looking for triggers and who's going to hurt you, and everyone is out to get me, right? You can have very different attitudes, but it's under because it's a construct of your brain, including, as I said before, including time and space itself, the construct of your brain. That also means you have the power within yourself to change your narrative, because it is a narrative that you construct, and you can change this narrative. Yes, you cannot suddenly fly out of a window, right? That you cannot change, but you can change. Are you the victim of anonymous forces, and all you can do is suffer and react? Or do you sort of are you open to the world in a compassionate and in a curious way? And wisdom tradition have always emphasized this. It's the attitude you bring to your life. Nietzsche has this, or you can go back to the ancient Romans and Greeks, amor fati, love your fate. That by itself, loving your fate, embracing it, that itself is an active attitude that you take to the world, rather than say, oh my God, I'm just a helpless, I'm just like this little ball being pushed around by all these forces. There isn't anything I can do. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who was Jewish, who was imprisoned by the Nazis in a concentration camp, in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, he emphasizes that those people that survived, they survived because they had meaning, they had something, they had a meaningful thing they searched towards, and this allowed them to suffer these unspeakable horrors of the concentration camp. So we have it within ourselves to affect the way we respond to everything. And this is shown very directly by the power of the placebo effect. Right? The placebo effect. What is the placebo effect? The placebo effect is when you as a doctor, you give me some treatment in one version of placebo effect. You give me a pill and say, here, this pill has cured already 1,000 people from their depression. And you read about it in the New York Times that this pill cures people from their depression. And then I take this pill, and it's given to me by a guy who is called Dr. So-and-so, and he went to Harvard Med School and has all the documentation on his, in his office behind him. Then I believe this, and then it will help me, even though it may only be a sugar pill. And you can show that 80% of for example, SSRIs, the dominant antidepressant medication, is in the placebo effect. There's a beautiful study out of Stanford recently that shows ketamine, whether or not you got ketamine, if you're blinded to it during anesthesia, it shows you the same. Whether or not you got it, you get the same remedial effect of ketamine, even though you didn't get it, but because you believe you got it. So your belief is very powerful. So that's a positive message. I think we ought to be sending out. If you believe in something, to the extent that you trust the system, to the extent that you trust the doctor or the shaman or the medical system, it's much more likely to help you than if you're deeply suspicious of everything.
So there are some who, I'm going to use the word kind of new age, some new age teachers who, in the context of consciousness, are teaching something called manifesting, and they use some of the scientific thought experiments or theories, such as the observer effect in quantum mechanics, and maybe the double slit experiment. I'm not sure. Is there any theoretical validity to any of that, where consciousness, the immaterial, can affect the material?
Well, the placebo effect.
Okay.
The placebo effect shows my belief in the power of either the doctor or the shaman or the procedure will actually significantly, maybe 3 times as much as the molecule itself, affect my chances of being helped out of depression or anxiety or whatever else it may be. So if I break my leg, I'm going to go to a doctor and I'm going to go for, a treatment, and my leg will get fixed. So there, the placebo effect in this case is probably not very strong. But for anything that infects my mind, brain, like for most psychiatric condition or even the immune system, people have shown placebo effect in the immune system, that where the immune system interacts with the brain, the power of what I believe, which is my mind, which seems very spooky, right? Your mind can influence how well you will actually do under various SSRI therapies. Yeah. Think about that. That doesn't, we don't know whether it requires quantum mechanics, right? Some people think consciousness requires quantum mechanics. That's an experimental proposition. We're trying to test it. Whether that's true or not, we simply don't know. But we do know, because it happens all the time, placebo effect. And its dark cousin, the nocebo, right? Because wherever there's light, there's also shade. If you believe that this procedure is going to hurt you, then likely or not, it will have detrimental effect for you.
Psychosomatic kind of illnesses.
Yeah, we have all these different names for it. All that means is that your belief can reach down into your gut, can reach down to your kidney, into your heart, into your immune system, and affect all of that. Now, that's the power of the mind over, we don't know how it works, but that's the power of the mind over matter.
So we're talking about aspects of expanding consciousness, which is also, I want to point people to your book. We already mentioned psychedelics. We touched on meditation. These are all ways we can expand our consciousness, correct? Right. I think you also mentioned yoga or anything that can put us in a flow state is a way to expand consciousness. Is that right? Correct. So a runner, who
losing the sense of self. I think it's critically involved.
Losing the sense of self. That's the key, right? Something that is fully absorbing. Would that include, I would think it would include learning new subjects or taking on something that just absorbs your attention.
Art, a new hobby, anything that takes you out of yourself, out of being constantly obsessed about me and my little things and my little issues. The more you ruminate about that, we know this from our own experience. It doesn't really help us ruminating endlessly about this pain or that pain or this insult that somebody gave me or that insult that somebody, supposedly made. It doesn't help at all. It just, you go into these endless loops and spin your wheels. Be open to the world, learn something about the world, be curious, embrace the world, be compassionate.
I want to point people to the book because I think the more they delve into this topic or explore their own consciousness, the better their life will be. I can't tell you how many times I've had a tree right in front of me that I'm looking at, but I didn't really see, or a beautiful ocean or.
Yeah, because you're in your own.
It's myself. My own shit is going through my head. Yes. To your point, it's losing the self. My last kind of question here, and I know it can be pretty involved, the answer potentially, but there's this whole thing out there on free will. Do we have free will? Do we not have free will? And I think you touch on it in your book, but I think you believe we do have free will, or at least so. And you do that a lot. I've seen you in interviews. You do that a lot. Like, I just raised my arm. Nobody did it my free. But I've come to the conclusion.
Don't let them talk you out of it. Don't let them cancel your free will.
So I've never, my view, where I've landed, and I'm not a scientist at all, or even a psychologist, but where I've landed is, I believe my will is entangled, right? I do believe I'm influenced by DNA. There are choices that are going to come up that really are kind of programmed into me. Yes. But it doesn't, I still feel I have free will from a decision standpoint. And you go through the book in here, and in fact, some of the experiments with measuring a reaction or a signal in the brain before a decision is made.
Yes.
Right. But
that's for random decisions, by the way. Yes.
Go ahead. Sorry. You can jump in here. So you do believe we have free will?
Yes.
And is it because of phi or because of the integrated information theory? Is it?
Yeah, because ultimately the true causes of my action are in my mind. Ultimately, so it really depends on your ontology. Ultimately, what exists is internal causal power of my mind, and that makes can make a decision like, should I stay here or should I? So at some point, I had to make this decision. Do I stay at Caltech, where I was for 25 years, a professor, or do I come up to the Allen Institute? And I think about, there's a clear fork in my mind. Stay in Pasadena or go to Seattle, right? I think about it, deliberate about it. I talk to a friend about it. I make a decision. That is a freely made decision in my mind. Now, will there be correlates of it in the brain? Of course there correlates. Yes, and so maybe you can pick up some sort of neural signal in it. But as we teach all of our students, correlation is not causation. Repeat after me. Correlation is not causation. Okay? Just because there's correlate doesn't mean that's the cause. The true causes are in the mind. That doesn't mean that all of my decisions, as you said, my parents influenced me, my color, where I grew up, the language I talked, untold myriads of unconscious influences on me. But then when I finally, for certain types of decision where I really deliberate, should I do this or should I do that? Those are the paradigmatic, consciously made, freely made decisions. Not when I'm on drugs, not when I'm drunk or someone puts a gun to my head. Then, of course, I don't have freedom.
Do you know? I don't know the arguments against free will really. They don't.
Well,
make
they
sense
always
to me.
say like
is it the Big Bang? Do you know that? Is it the fact that there's a Big Bang? Things are moving forward in the universe, and
most certainly not, because there's of course random noise. In fact, quantum noise, and in principle, it's not even predictable, right? So certainly, it's not inherent in the Big Bang because of quantum noise. Right? But that just replaces determinism with noise. That's not what people mean by freely. I don't mean a random choice. A random choice is worse than a predetermined choice in my mind. No, you want a free voice. And the argument is always, well, but ultimately your brain had to do it. No, but if you switch your point of view, it's not the brain that's really the actor. The true actor are the causal power of your conscious mind that have a physical substrate. But true existence for itself is only in consciousness, and only what truly exists can cause. Look, the rock 65 million years ago that hit us, right, on a spring morning 65 million years ago, right, in the Yucatan, that wiped out all the dinosaurs, right, generated tsunami, it's a mile high. It didn't want to hit us. It had no free will. It didn't even exist for itself. It's just orbital mechanics, right? So it didn't want to wipe us out. It was just orbital mechanics, and the Earth happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time and got hit by this. Right? So but consciousness exists absolute for itself, and only what exists can cause. So therefore, it's my decision, not my brain's decision. It's a big difference. My brain didn't decide. I made this decision to move from California to Washington State.
Thank you. I'm glad we got it in. I went as fast as I could. Christof,
thank you.
This whole field is fascinating to me. Thank you so much for coming on. I'll edit this up so people can find you.
ChristofKoch.com. My full name, Christof, Koch.com.
The book is everywhere.
Yeah,
and
you can get the book now.
And thank you so much. Fantastic.
Namaste. Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye-bye. Well, that's a wrap. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed it, do share it with your friends and on your social platforms. Big thanks to Sam Williams, my audio guy, and the beautiful bumper music you're hearing is Michael Petrovich's Bella Luna. For all my show notes or resource links, visit LarryWeeks.com, and we will talk again soon.